You're sitting in a quiet coffee shop, minding your own business, when suddenly you witness something that makes your blood boil. A woman, clearly just trying to enjoy her morning, gets slapped across the face by some arrogant stranger who thinks he owns the world. Your first instinct might be to intervene, to stand up for what's right. But what if I told you that sometimes the universe has a way of serving justice in the most unexpected ways? What those bullies didn't know was that the quiet woman they just humiliated wasn't just any ordinary person. She was someone who had been trained to handle situations far more dangerous than a coffee shop confrontation. Someone who had faced down terrorists in foreign lands, who had completed missions that most people couldn't even imagine. Someone who understood that real strength isn't about throwing the first punch. It's about knowing exactly how to end a fight when it comes to you. This is the story of Sarah Martinez, a decorated Navy SEAL who thought she had left her military days behind her. She believed she could blend into civilian life, become just another face in the crowd. But on one ordinary Tuesday morning, three strangers would make the biggest mistake of their lives. They would learn that some people you just don't mess with, and that respect isn't something you can demand, it's something you earn. What happened next will be talked about in that small town for years to come. It would remind everyone that heroes walk among us every day, often invisible until the moment they're needed most. This is a story about consequences, about standing up for what's right, and about why you should never judge someone by their appearance. Are you ready to discover what happens when bullies pick the wrong target? Let me tell you about the day three men learned that actions have consequences, the hard way. Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls her age. While her classmates worried about makeup and boys, she was climbing trees and learning how to start fires. Her father, Miguel Martinez, was a retired Marine who had served 3 tours in Vietnam. He never pushed his military background on his daughter, but Sarah seemed drawn to it naturally. Growing up in the small town of Cedar Falls, Iowa, Sarah was known as the quiet girl who could outrun most of the boys in her class. She wasn't particularly tall or muscular, standing at just 5 feet 4 inches with a lean build. Her dark hair was usually pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she had these intense brown eyes that seemed to notice everything around her. People often underestimated her because of her size and quiet nature, but that would prove to be their mistake time and again. Sarah's childhood wasn't easy. Her mother, Elena, worked 2 jobs to help support the family after Miguel was injured in a workplace accident that left him with a permanent limp. Money was always tight in the Martinez household, but they were rich in values. Miguel taught his daughter about honor, discipline, and the importance of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Elena showed her the power of quiet strength and perseverance. When Sarah was 12, something happened that would shape her entire future. She was walking home from school when she witnessed 3 older boys picking on a younger kid named Tommy Chun. Tommy was small for his age and wore thick glasses that made him an easy target for bullies. The boys had cornered him near the old railroad bridge and were demanding his lunch money. Most kids would have kept walking, afraid to get involved. But Sarah wasn't most kids. She had watched her father struggle with nightmares from the war, seen him wake up screaming about buddies he couldn't save. She had absorbed his stories about leaving no one behind, about standing up for the innocent. Without hesitation, she dropped her backpack and walked straight toward the confrontation. The bullies were bigger than her, older and stronger. But Sarah had been learning martial arts at a small dojo in town, and more importantly, she had something they didn't, the absolute certainty that what she was doing was right. She didn't threaten them or try to negotiate. She simply positioned herself between Tommy and his attackers and said quietly, "Walk away." The leader of the group, a kid named Brad Morrison, whose father was the town banker, laughed at her. "What are you going to do about it, Martinez? You're just a girl." Sarah didn't say another word. When Brad reached out to shove her aside, she moved with a speed and precision that shocked everyone present. She grabbed his wrist, twisted it in a way that made him cry out in pain, and before he knew what was happening, he was on the ground looking up at the sky. His 2 friends stared in disbelief as this small girl stood over their leader, her eyes never leaving theirs. "I said walk away," she repeated calmly. They did, and they never bothered Tommy Chin again. Word of what happened spread through the small town quickly. Some people were impressed by Sarah's courage. Others worried that she was too aggressive for a young girl. But Sarah didn't care what people thought. She had learned something important that day. She had the ability to protect people, and with that ability came responsibility. High school was a time when most teenagers are trying to figure out who they are, but Sarah already knew. She excelled in her studies while also playing 3 sports: cross-country, swimming, and wrestling. She was the only girl on the wrestling team, and despite facing constant skepticism and occasional harassment, she earned the respect of her teammates through sheer determination and skill. Her wrestling coach, Mr. Peterson, was a former college wrestler who had initially been reluctant to let a girl join the team. But Sarah proved herself in practice every day, often outworking boys who were much larger than her. She had this incredible ability to stay calm under pressure and find her opponent's weakness. Peterson later said that Sarah was one of the most mentally tough athletes he had ever coached. During her junior year, military recruiters started visiting the school. The Army, Navy, and Marine Corps all sent representatives to talk to potential recruits. Sarah attended every presentation, asking detailed questions about special operations and combat roles. The recruiters were impressed by her knowledge and obvious physical conditioning, but some seemed skeptical about whether a small-town girl really understood what military service entailed. It was Navy Chief Petty Officer Lisa Rodriguez who saw something special in Sarah. Rodriguez was a recruiter who had served with the Navy SEALs in a support role and understood the mental toughness required for elite military units. After her presentation, she approached Sarah privately. "I've been watching you during the presentation," Rodriguez said. "You asked better questions than most of the boys. Have you ever considered the Navy SEALs?" Sarah's eyes lit up. She had read about the SEALs, knew they were the most elite special operations unit in the military. But she also knew they had never accepted women into their ranks. "They don't take women," Sarah replied. Rodriguez smiled. "Not yet, but that might change. And when it does, they're going to need women who are ready. Women who have prepared themselves physically and mentally for the challenge." That conversation changed everything for Sarah. She began training with a new intensity, waking up at 5 in the morning to run 5 miles before school. She spent hours in the weight room, not trying to bulk up, but building the kind of functional strength and endurance she knew she would need. She studied everything she could find about Navy SEAL training, memorizing the requirements, and understanding the philosophy behind the program. Her parents were supportive, but worried. They knew their daughter was special, but they also understood how dangerous military service could be, especially in special operations. Miguel had mixed feelings about Sarah following in his footsteps. He was proud of her dedication and courage, but he also knew the cost of war in ways that Sarah couldn't yet understand. The night before Sarah left for college, Miguel sat her down for a serious conversation. They were sitting on the front porch of their small house, watching the sun set over the cornfields that stretched to the horizon. "Mija," he said, using the Spanish nickname he had called her since childhood, "I know you've made up your mind about the Navy, and I'm proud of you for wanting to serve. But I need you to understand something." Sarah turned to face her father, seeing the seriousness in his expression. "War changes people," Miguel continued. "It takes things from you that you can never get back. Innocence, sleep, sometimes friends who become like brothers to you. I want you to be sure that this is really what you want, because once you start down this path, there's no going back to the person you were before." Sarah considered her father's words carefully. She thought about Tommy Chun, about all the time she had stood up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. She thought about the bullies she had faced and the one she knew existed in the world on a much larger scale. "Dad," she said finally, "I know it's going to be hard. I know it's going to change me. But I also know that there are people out there who need protecting, and I have the ability to do it. If I don't use this gift I've been given, if I don't step up when I'm needed, then what's the point of having it?" Miguel nodded slowly, recognizing his own sense of duty reflected in his daughter's words. He reached over and squeeze her hand. "Then, you have my blessing, Mija. But promise me something." "What's that?" "Promise me you'll remember who you are. No matter what happens over there, no matter what you see or what you have to do, remember that you're Sarah Martinez from Cedar Falls, Iowa. Remember that your strength comes from wanting to protect people, not from wanting to hurt them. Can you promise me that?" Sarah squeezed her father's hand back. "I promise, Dad." The next morning, Sarah left for the University of Minnesota, where she would study criminal justice while preparing for her eventual enlistment in Navy. She had a plan. She would complete her degree, build her physical and mental conditioning to elite levels, and be ready when the opportunity finally came. College was both challenging and fulfilling for Sarah. She maintained a perfect grade point average while also competing on the university's wrestling team. She was one of the few women competing against men at the collegiate level, and her success earned her recognition both locally and nationally. Sports Illustrated even did a small feature on her, calling her the quiet storm for her calm demeanor and explosive performances. But Sarah's focus was always on her ultimate goal. She trained with former military personnel who lived in the Minneapolis area, learning advanced combat techniques and survival skills. She spent summers working with search and rescue teams in Montana, building her wilderness survival abilities and learning to operate in harsh conditions. During her senior year, the news she had been waiting for finally came. The Pentagon announced that they were opening Navy SEAL training to women on a trial basis. The announcement was controversial, with critics claiming that women couldn't meet the physical demands of the program. Supporters argued that it was time to give qualified women the opportunity to prove themselves. Sarah was ready. She had spent 4 years preparing for this moment, building her body and mind for the challenge ahead. Her professors recommended her for the program. Her wrestling coaches vouched for her mental toughness, and her fitness scores were off the charts. The day she received her acceptance letter, Sarah called her parents immediately. "I'm in," she said simply when her mother answered the phone. Elena Martinez felt her heart skip a beat. She had known this day would come, had watched her daughter prepare for it for years. But knowing something is coming and feeling ready for it are two different things. "We're proud of you, Mija," Elena said, her voice thick with emotion. "We're proud and we're scared and we love you so much." That night, Sarah packed her belongings for the last time as a civilian. Tomorrow, she would begin the journey that would transform her from small-town girl with big dreams into one of the most elite warriors in the world. As she folded her clothes and gathered her personal items, Sarah thought about her father's words from years earlier. She thought about staying true to who she was, about remembering that her strength came from a desire to protect rather than to destroy. She thought about Tommy Chun and all the other people who needed someone to stand between them and the bullies of the world. She had no way of knowing that years later, in a small coffee shop in San Diego, she would face a test that would prove whether she had truly kept her promise to her father. She couldn't know that 3 strangers would mistake her quiet strength for weakness, or that they would learn the hard way that some people you just don't mess with. But that morning, as Sarah Martinez prepared to leave for Navy SEAL training, she was simply a young woman with a mission to become the kind of person who could stand up for those who needed protection, no matter what the cost. The first day of basic underwater demolition SEAL training, known simply as BUD/S, was a reality check that hit Sarah like a freight train. She arrived at the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado, California, at 0500 hours on a foggy Monday morning in September. The facility looked exactly like she had imagined. Stark, intimidating, and designed to break people down before building them back up. Sarah was one of 3 women in her class of 180 candidates, a historic first for the Navy SEALs. The media attention had been intense leading up to the program, with reporters and photographers documenting their arrival. Sarah hated the spotlight, preferring to let her actions speak for themselves, but she understood the significance of the moment. The other 2 women were impressive in their own right. Lieutenant Jennifer Walsh was a former Marine officer who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan and Petty Officer Second Class Maria Santos was a Navy explosive ordnance disposal technician with years of combat experience. Both were strong, capable women who had already proven themselves in military service. But from the very first moment they stepped onto the training grounds, it was clear that they were facing an uphill battle. Some of the male candidates were supportive, understanding that if these women were there, they had earned their place. Others were openly skeptical or hostile, convinced that the inclusion of women would somehow diminish the program or put lives at risk in real combat situations. The instructors, a collection of active duty SEALs and other special operations personnel, maintained a professional demeanor, but Sarah could sense their reservations. This was uncharted territory for everyone involved, and the pressure to succeed or fail was enormous. Instructor Chief Petty Officer Marcus Johnson was a 15-year SEAL veteran who had seen combat in Iraq, Afghanistan, and several classified operations around the world. He was a mountain of a man, standing 6 feet 3 inches with arms like tree trunks and a voice that could be heard across the entire training facility. During the initial briefing, he made the expectations crystal clear. "I don't care if you're male, female, green, or purple," Johnson announced to the assembled candidates. "The ocean doesn't care about your gender when it's trying to drown you. The enemy doesn't care about political correctness when they're trying to kill you. The only thing that matters here is whether you can do the job. We're going to find out who can and who can't, and there's no participation trophy for almost making it." The first phase of training was designed to test basic physical conditioning and mental resilience. Candidates were subjected to constant physical training, running in boots through soft sand, performing endless calisthenics, and learning to operate in and around the water for hours at a time. Sarah quickly discovered that her years of preparation had served her well, but they hadn't fully prepared her for the relentless intensity of SEAL training. The instructors seemed determined to find her breaking point, pushing her harder than some of the male candidates. She understood why. If women were going to be accepted into the SEALs, they couldn't just meet the standard, they had to exceed it. During the third week of training, Sarah faced her first major test. The class was participating in a boat crew exercise, where teams of 7 candidates had to carry heavy inflatable boats over their heads while running on the beach. Sarah's boat crew was made up entirely of men who ranged from 180 to 220 pounds. At 140 pounds, she was by far the smallest member of the team. The exercise was designed to build teamwork and mental toughness, but it quickly became apparent that some of her teammates viewed her as a liability. During one particularly challenging drill, where the crew had to carry the boat for 2 miles in soft sand, Sarah could hear grumbling from some of the men. "We're never going to make time with her holding us back," muttered one candidate, a former college football player named Derek Thompson. "Maybe she should just ring the bell and save us all the trouble," added another. Sarah said nothing, but she dug deeper, pushing herself to carry more than her share of the boat's weight. By the end of the exercise, she was one of the few candidates who wasn't completely exhausted. That night, she found Thompson and the others who had complained. "I heard what you said today," she told them calmly. "I understand your concern, but I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not going to be the reason this crew fails. So you can either work with me or keep complaining. But if you choose to complain, you better make sure you can back it up." Thompson looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Sarah's eyes told him that would be a mistake. From that point forward, the crew began to work together more effectively, and Sarah earned a grudging respect from her teammates. The real test came during Hell Week, the infamous 5-and-a-half-day period where candidates are pushed to their absolute physical and mental limits. They are allowed a total of 4 hours of sleep during the entire week while being subjected to constant physical training, cold water exposure, and psychological pressure designed to make them quit. Hell Week began on a Sunday night with surf torture, where candidates had to sit in the frigid Pacific Ocean for hours while waves crashed over them. The water temperature was 58 degrees, cold enough to cause hypothermia if candidates weren't careful. Sarah had always been sensitive to cold, and she knew this would be one of her biggest challenges. As she sat in the water with her classmates, Feeling the cold seep into her bones and make her muscles ache, Sarah focused on the mental techniques she had learned from her father. Miguel had taught her that pain was temporary, but quitting was permanent. She thought about Tommy Chun, about all the people she had protected over the years, and about the promise she had made to herself to become someone who could stand between innocent people and those who would harm them. Hour after hour, the cold water tried to break her will. Candidates around her began to ring the bell, the symbolic act of quitting that would end their suffering, but also their dreams of becoming a SEAL. Of the 180 candidates who had started the program, only 90 remained by the middle of Hell Week. Jennifer Walsh rang the bell on Tuesday night, overcome by hypothermia and exhaustion. Maria Santos made it until Thursday morning before a stress fracture in her foot forced her to withdraw. Sarah was now the only woman left in the class, carrying the hopes and expectations of everyone who believed women deserved a chance to prove themselves. The instructors seemed to take special interest in testing Sarah's resolve. They made her do extra exercises, subjected her to additional psychological pressure, and constantly reminded her that she could quit at any time. But Sarah had been preparing for this moment her entire life, and she wasn't about to give up now. On Thursday night, during the most brutal part of Hell Week, Sarah found herself leading a team of exhausted candidates through a navigation exercise in the middle of the night. They had to carry a heavy log through an obstacle course while finding specific checkpoints using only a compass and their training. Several of the men in her group were bigger and stronger than her, but they were so exhausted they could barely think straight. Sarah took charge, using her navigation skills and mental clarity to guide the team through the exercise. She encouraged the men who were struggling, helped them focus on the task at hand, and made sure no one got left behind. By the time they completed the exercise, even the most skeptical of her classmates had to admit that she was proving herself to be a natural leader. Friday morning brought the end of Hell Week, and Sarah was one of only 42 candidates who had survived the ordeal. She was exhausted, battered, and pushed to her absolute limits, but she had proven something important to herself and everyone around her. She belonged there. Instructor Johnson approached her as she sat on the beach, watching the sunrise over the Pacific Ocean. "Martinez," he said, his voice showing a hint of respect that hadn't been there before. "Hell Week is over. How do you feel?" Sarah looked up at the gruff instructor, her eyes still showing the determination that had carried her through the past 5 days. "I feel like I'm ready for Phase 2, Instructor Johnson." Johnson nodded slowly. "Good answer, because Phase 2 is when things really get interesting. Phase 2 of BUD/S focused on diving and underwater operations." Sarah had always been a strong swimmer, but SEAL diving was unlike anything she had experienced before. Candidates learned to use scuba equipment, perform underwater navigation, and conduct combat swimming operations. They also learned to deal with equipment failures and emergency situations while underwater, skills that could mean the difference between life and death in real combat operations. One of the most challenging aspects of Phase 2 was pool competency, a series of underwater tests designed to simulate equipment failures and emergency situations. Candidates had their masks ripped off, their air supplies cut, and their equipment tangled while underwater. They had to remain calm, solve the problems, and surface safely. Sarah excelled at these exercises, drawing on the mental toughness she had developed throughout her life. While other candidates panicked when their equipment failed, Sarah remained calm and methodical, working through each problem step by step. Her small size actually became an advantage in some situations, allowing her to maneuver through tight spaces and untangle equipment more easily than larger candidates. During one particularly challenging exercise, Sarah was paired with Derek Thompson, the former football player who had initially doubted her abilities. They were supposed to swim underwater for 50 meters while sharing a single air supply, an exercise that required complete trust and coordination between partners. Halfway through the exercise, their shared regulator malfunctioned, leaving them without air while still 25 meters from her destination. Thompson began to panic, thrashing in the water and burning through their remaining oxygen even faster. Sarah grabbed him, looked him in the eyes, and gave him the calm down signal they had been taught. Then, she did something that surprised everyone watching. She gave Thompson the last breath of air from her emergency bottle and swam the remaining distance without breathing, holding her breath for nearly 2 minutes while helping her struggling partner. When they finally surfaced, Thompson was gasping and grateful to be alive. "Why did you do that?" he asked Sarah later. "You could have left me down there and saved yourself." Sarah looked at him with the same quiet intensity she had shown since childhood. "Because that's not who I am. I don't leave people behind." From that moment on, Thompson became one of Sarah's strongest supporters in the class. He had seen firsthand the kind of person she was under pressure, and he understood that her small size had nothing to do with the size of her heart or her commitment to her teammates. Phase 3 of BUD/S focused on land warfare, teaching candidates advanced combat tactics, weapons handling, and small unit operations. This was where Sarah's wrestling background and natural athleticism really shone. She was an excellent marksman, a quick learner when it came to tactics, and showed exceptional situational awareness during training exercises. The final exercise of Phase 3 was a capstone event where candidates had to plan and execute a complex mission involving reconnaissance, target identification, and simulated direct action. Sarah was chosen to lead one of the assault teams, recognition of the leadership abilities she had demonstrated throughout training. The mission was a success, with Sarah's team completing all objectives while maintaining operational security and avoiding detection by the opposing forces. Her tactical decisions were sound, her leadership was calm and effective, and her performance under pressure impressed even the most skeptical instructors. When BUD/S finally ended, Sarah was one of only 23 candidates who had successfully completed all phases of training. She was the first woman to ever complete Navy SEAL training, a historic achievement that would open doors for future generations of female warriors. At the graduation ceremony, Sarah stood with her classmates as they received their SEAL tridents, the coveted insignia that marked them as members of one of the world's most elite military units. Her parents had flown in from Iowa to watch the ceremony, and Sarah could see the pride and worry in their eyes as she walked across the stage. Instructor Johnson was the one who pinned Sarah's trident to her uniform. As he did, he leaned in close and spoke quietly enough that only she could hear. "Martinez, when you first got here, I wasn't sure if this was going to work. I wasn't sure if women had what it takes to be SEALs. You proved me wrong, and I'm man enough to admit it. You didn't just complete the training, you excelled at it. You're going to make a hell of a SEAL." Sarah nodded her thanks, but her mind was already focused on what came next. BUD/S was just the beginning. Now she had to prove herself in advanced training and eventually in real combat operations. She had achieved her dream of becoming a SEAL, but the real test of her abilities was still to come. That night, as she celebrated with her classmates and family, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this point. From a small town in Iowa to the beaches of Coronado, from protecting Tommy Chun on a playground to earning her place among America's most elite warriors, she had stayed true to the promise she made to her father years earlier. She was still Sarah Martinez from Cedar Falls, Iowa. Her strength still came from a desire to protect rather than to destroy. And now she had the training and the authorization to use that strength in service of her country and the innocent people who needed protection around the world. After completing BUD/S, Sarah was assigned to SEAL Team 3, based out of Naval Base Coronado. The transition from training to operational status was both exciting and daunting. She was no longer just proving that women could complete SEAL training. Now she had to demonstrate that she could operate effectively as part of an elite combat team. Her new teammates were a mix of seasoned veterans and recent BUD/S graduates like herself. The team leader was Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, a 12-year SEAL veteran who had led numerous successful operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. Morrison was known for his tactical brilliance and his ability to bring his people home safely, but he was also skeptical about having a woman on his team. Morrison said during her first team briefing, "I want to be straight with you. I don't care what you accomplished in training. This is the real world. And in the real world, your teammates' lives depend on your ability to do your job under conditions that make BUD/S look like summer camp. I'm going to evaluate you the same way I evaluate every other member of this team, by your performance when lives are on the line." Sarah appreciated Morrison's directness. She had never wanted special treatment, and she understood that trust had to be earned through action, not words. Her first 6 months with Team 3 were spent in advanced training and workup cycles preparing for deployment. Sarah learned advanced close-quarters combat techniques, studied foreign languages, and mastered the use of specialized equipment that SEALs used in various mission profiles. She also underwent extensive psychological evaluation and counseling to prepare for the mental challenges of combat operations. The team's first major exercise was a simulated hostage rescue operation at a training facility in Nevada. The scenario involved rescuing American civilians being held by terrorists in a compound that closely resembled real-world locations where SEALs might be called upon to operate. Sarah was assigned to the assault team that would be responsible for clearing the building and securing the hostages. The exercise was designed to be as realistic as possible, with role players acting as both hostages and terrorists, live-fire scenarios, and time pressure that simulated the urgency of real combat operations. During the planning phase, Sarah noticed something that the others had missed. The building's blueprints showed a ventilation system that could provide an alternative route into the compound, bypassing the heavily defended main entrances. She brought this to Morrison's attention during the mission briefing. "Sir, I think we should consider using the ventilation system to get a team inside before we initiate the main assault. The opening is small, but I could fit through it and provide intelligence on the interior layout and hostage locations." Morrison studied the blueprints more carefully, considering Sarah's suggestion. The other team members exchanged glances, some looking skeptical about the plan. "It's risky," said Chief Petty Officer Mike Rodriguez, the team's senior enlisted member. "If you get stuck in there, or if they detect you, you'll be cut off from support." Sarah nodded. "I understand the risk, Chief, but it could give us a significant tactical advantage. We know exactly where the hostages are and how many terrorists we're dealing with before we commit to the main assault." Morrison made the decision. "We'll modify the plan. Martinez, you'll infiltrate through the ventilation system and provide reconnaissance. But if anything goes wrong, you signal immediately and we abort the insertion." The exercise began at 0200 hours on a moonless night. While the rest of the team moved into position around the compound, Sarah approached the building from the rear where the ventilation intake was located. She had stripped down to basic gear to reduce her profile, carrying only a suppressed pistol, a knife, and a small radio for communication. The ventilation shaft was even smaller than it had appeared in the blueprints, barely wide enough for her shoulders. Sarah had to army crawl through the metal ductwork, moving slowly to avoid making noise that might alert the role players inside. The metal was cold and sharp-edged, cutting into her arms and legs as she moved, but she ignored the discomfort and focused on the mission. After 20 minutes of careful movement, Sarah reached a vent that opened into the main room where the hostages were being held. Through the metal grate, she could see 3 role players acting as hostages and 2 acting as terrorists. One of the terrorists was wearing a suicide vest simulator, a detail that hadn't been included in the intelligence briefing. Sarah keyed her radio and whispered her observations to the team. "Falcon Base, this is Recon 1. I have eyes on 3 hostages, 2 tangos. 1 tango is wearing a vest. Repeat, 1 tango has explosives. Hostages are zip-tied, but appear mobile." Morrison's voice came back through her earpiece. "Copy, Recon 1. Can you neutralize the vest carrier?" Sarah studied the room layout and the positioning of the role players. The terrorist with the vest was standing near a window, perfect for a sniper shot if the team had positioned someone outside. But the angle wasn't right for the planned sniper position. Negative, Falcon Base. Bad angle for exterior shot. I can take him from here if you want to modify the approach. There was a long pause. Sarah knew that Morrison was weighing the risks of having her attempt the shot from inside the ventilation system versus aborting the mission or accepting the risk of the suicide vest during the main assault. Recon 1, you are cleared to engage. Take the shot when you're ready. Sarah carefully removed the vent grate, making barely a whisper of sound. She drew her suppressed pistol and lined up the shot through the opening. The role player was only 15 feet away, well within her effective range, but the angle was awkward and she would only get one chance. She controlled her breathing, just as she had been taught in marksmanship training. In through the nose, out through the mouth, finding that natural pause between breaths where her body was perfectly still. The shot broke cleanly, and the paint round struck the role player in the center of his chest. He immediately went down, simulating a kill shot. Tango down, Sarah whispered into radio. The main assault commenced immediately, with the rest of the team breaching through multiple entry points simultaneously. The exercise was over in less than 3 minutes, with all hostages rescued and all remaining terrorists neutralized. The evaluators declared it one of the most successful hostage rescue simulations they had ever observed. During the debrief, Morrison publicly credited Sarah's reconnaissance and precision shooting with making the mission a success. Martinez's initiative in identifying the alternative approach and her accurate intelligence gathering allowed us to save the hostages and prevent a potential catastrophic explosion. Outstanding work. The other team members began to look at Sarah differently after that exercise. She had proven that her small size could be a tactical advantage rather than a liability, and her calm performance under pressure had demonstrated the kind of mental toughness they needed in a teammate. 6 months later, Team 3 received orders for their first combat deployment. They were being sent to Afghanistan to conduct direct action missions against high-value Taliban and Al-Qaeda targets. Sarah would be the first woman to deploy with a Navy SEAL team in a combat role. The deployment briefings painted a picture of a complex operational environment where the enemy was skilled, motivated, and intimately familiar with the terrain. Sarah and her teammates would be operating in some of the most dangerous regions of Afghanistan, conducting raids against compounds and cave complexes where intelligence indicated the presence of bomb makers, weapon smugglers, and terrorist leaders. Before leaving for Afghanistan, Sarah was granted 2 weeks of leave to visit her family in Iowa. She hadn't seen her parents since her graduation from BUD/S, and she wanted to spend time with them before deploying into harm's way. Cedar Falls looked exactly the same as it had when she left for college years earlier, but Sarah felt like a completely different person. She was no longer the small-town girl who had left Iowa with big dreams. She was now a highly trained special operations warrior preparing for combat deployment. Her father, Miguel, noticed the change immediately. Sarah carried herself differently now, with the quiet confidence of someone who had been tested and proven herself. She was more aware of her surroundings, constantly scanning for potential threats, even in the safety of her hometown. Her eyes had a harder edge to them, the look of someone who had seen things that most people never would. On their last night together before Sarah's deployment, Miguel took her out to the same front porch where they had talked years earlier about her decision to join the military. "You've changed, Mija," he said gently. "The training has made you into something formidable. But I can still see the girl who protected Tommy Chun in your eyes. That gives me hope." Sarah leaned against the porch railing, looking out over the familiar cornfields. "I think about that day sometimes, Dad. About how simple it was. There was a kid being picked on, and I stopped it. No politics, no strategy, no complex rules of engagement. Just right and wrong. Miguel Nadif. That's what I'm talking about. That moral clarity. Don't let the complexity of what you're about to face cloud that. At the end of the day, you're still the girl who stands between the innocent and those who would hurt them. The uniform and the training are just tools to help you do that job better." The next morning, Sarah hugged her parents goodbye at the small Cedar Falls airport. Elena cried, despite her efforts to stay strong for her daughter. Miguel maintained his composure until Sarah was walking toward the plane. Then he called out to her. "Sarah." She turned back, and He made the gesture he had taught her as a child, hand over heart, then extended toward her. It meant, "I love you," and "I'm proud of you," in the Martinez family shorthand they had developed over the years. Sarah returned the gesture, then boarded the plane that would take her to her deployment. The flight to Afghanistan involved multiple stops and connections, giving Sarah time to think about what lay ahead. She reviewed her mission briefings, studied intelligence reports, and mentally rehearsed the tactics and procedures she might need to employ. But mostly, she thought about her father's words and the promise she had made to stay true to who she was. When the transport plane finally landed at Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan, Sarah stepped off into a different world. The air was thin and dry, filled with dust that seemed to coat everything. The base was a sprawling collection of temporary buildings, defensive positions, and aircraft that spoke to the massive military presence in the country. Team 3 was assigned to a forward operating base in eastern Afghanistan, near the Pakistan border. The area was known for high levels of Taliban and al-Qaeda activity, with regular attacks on coalition forces and a complex network of caves and mountain hideouts that provided shelter for enemy fighters. Sarah's first combat mission came just 2 weeks after arrival. Intelligence had identified a compound where a bomb maker responsible for several IED attacks was believed to be hiding. The mission was straightforward: surround the compound, capture or kill the target, and gather any intelligence materials that might lead to other terrorist cells. The target compound was located in a remote valley, accessible only by helicopter or a dangerous overland route through mountain passes. Morrison decided on a helicopter insertion under cover of darkness, with 2 teams approaching the compound from different directions to prevent escape. Sarah was assigned to the primary assault team that would clear the main building while the secondary team secured the perimeter and prevented anyone from escaping. As they flew toward the target in their MH-60 Black Hawk helicopter, Sarah felt the familiar pre-mission calm that had served her well throughout training. The helicopter insertion went smoothly, with both teams fast roping into position without being detected. Sarah's team moved quickly toward the compound, using night vision goggles to navigate in the darkness. Intelligence had indicated that there might be civilians in the compound, including women and children, so the rules of engagement emphasized the need to positively identify targets before firing. As they approached the main building, Sarah heard voices inside, speaking in Pashto. Her language training allowed her to understand that they were discussing the presence of helicopters in the area and debating whether to run or fight. The decision was made for them when one of the men inside opened fire through a window, forcing the SEAL team to take cover and return fire. Sarah found herself pressed against a wall next to Chief Rodriguez as bullets cracked overhead. "Martinez," Rodriguez said, "can you understand what they're saying?" Sarah listened carefully to the voices inside. 3, maybe 4 men. They're arguing about whether to surrender. One of them says he has detonators and is threatening to blow up the building if we try to enter. Rodriguez relayed this information to Morrison, who was coordinating the overall operation from his position with the secondary team. The presence of explosives changed the tactical situation significantly, requiring a more careful approach to prevent civilian casualties and preserve intelligence materials. "We need to get eyes inside that building," Morrison's voice came through their radios. "Martinez, can you find a way to observe the interior without being detected?" Sarah studied the compound layout, looking for opportunities. The building had small windows near the roof line, probably for ventilation, that might provide access for reconnaissance. Getting to them would require climbing the exterior wall while under potential fire from inside, but it was doable. "I could get up to those high windows," she told Rodriguez. "Give me covering fire, and I can climb up there for a look." Rodriguez shook his head. "Too risky. If they see you climbing, you'll be completely exposed." Sarah looked at the building again, calculating angles and risks. "Chief, I'm the smallest target we have, and I'm the only one who speaks enough Pashto to understand what's going on inside. This is what I trained for." Rodriguez considered for a moment, then keyed his radio. "Falcon Base, assault leader requests permission for reconnaissance climb on the main structure." Morrison's voice came back immediately. Negative, too much risk for limited intelligence gain. But Sarah was already moving, using hand signals to indicate her route to the other team members. Sometimes in combat, you have to act on instinct and trust your training rather than wait for permission. She knew she could make the climb safely, and the intelligence she could gather might save lives and ensure mission success. The climb up the exterior wall was exactly as challenging as she had expected, requiring her to move slowly and quietly while exposing herself to potential fire from inside. But her rock climbing experience and the physical conditioning from SEAL training served her well, and she reached the high window without being detected. Through the window, Sarah could see 4 men inside the main room, along with 2 women and 3 children who were clearly civilians. One of the men was holding what appeared to be a detonator connected to several packages that were probably explosives. The bomb maker they were looking for was definitely inside, along with what looked like materials for making more IEDs. Sarah keyed her radio and whispered her observations to the team. The presence of civilians made the situation much more complex, requiring careful coordination to prevent innocent casualties while still completing the mission. Morrison made the call to use a flashbang grenade to disorient the men inside, while Sarah provided covering fire from her elevated position. The plan was risky, but offered the best chance of rescuing the civilians while capturing the bomb maker and his associates. When the flashbang detonated, Sarah was ready. She engaged the man with the detonator first, using her suppressed rifle to neutralize him before he could trigger any explosives. The assault team breached through the main door simultaneously, quickly overwhelming the remaining fighters. The entire engagement lasted less than 2 minutes, but it felt like hours to Sarah. When it was over, they had captured the bomb maker, rescued 6 civilians, and recovered a significant amount of intelligence materials about other terrorist cells operating in the region. During the debrief back at base, Morrison pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. "Martinez, what you did tonight was both heroic and insubordinate. You disobeyed a direct order when I told you not to make that climb." Sarah stood at attention, ready to accept whatever consequences came from her decision. "Yes, sir. I believe the intelligence was critical for mission success and civilian protection." Morrison studied her for a long moment. "You were right. Your reconnaissance and covering fire saved those civilians and ensured we got the target. But if you ever disobey a direct order again, I'll have you transferred back to conventional forces so fast your head will spin. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear, sir." Morrison's expression softened slightly. "That said, you showed exceptional courage and tactical judgment tonight. Your teammates are alive, and the mission was successful because of your actions. Well done, SEAL." That night, as Sarah cleaned her equipment and prepared for the next mission, she thought about her father's words and the promise she had made. She had faced her first real combat test and stayed true to her values, protecting innocent people while accomplishing her military objectives. She was still Sarah Martinez from Cedar Falls, Iowa. She was still the girl who had protected Tommy Chin all those years ago. But now she was also something more. A proven warrior who had earned her place among America's most elite fighters through courage, skill, and an unwavering commitment to protecting the innocent. Sarah's reputation as a skilled operator grew quickly during her deployment in Afghanistan. Over the next 8 months, she participated in 43 combat operations, ranging from direct action raids to complex reconnaissance missions deep behind enemy lines. Her small size, language skills, and tactical intelligence made her an invaluable asset to Team 3, and she earned the respect of even the most skeptical teammates through her consistent performance under fire. The mission that would define Sarah's military career came in the spring of her second year with the team. Intelligence had identified a high-value target known as the Engineer, a bomb maker whose sophisticated IEDs had killed dozens of coalition soldiers and Afghan civilians. The Engineer was believed to be hiding in a mountain cave complex near the Pakistan border, protected by a network of fighters and early warning systems that had allowed him to evade capture for years. Previous attempts to locate and capture the engineer had failed, partly because the cave system was so extensive and partly because he seemed to have intelligence about incoming operations that allowed him to escape before teams could reach him. The suspicion was that he had sources within the Afghan security forces who were providing him with advance warning. Lieutenant Commander Morrison decided to try a different approach for this operation. Instead of a large-scale assault that would be difficult to keep secret, he would send a small reconnaissance team to locate the engineer and confirm his position before calling in additional support. The team would consist of just 3 people: Morrison himself, Chief Rodriguez, and Sarah. "This is going to be different from anything we've done before," Morrison explained during the mission briefing. "We're going to infiltrate the area during daylight, disguised as civilians. Martinez, your job will be to pose as Rodriguez's daughter while we move through the local villages gathering intelligence. Your language skills and smaller size make you the logical choice for this cover identity." The plan was audacious and risky. SEALs typically operated under cover of darkness with full military equipment and backup support. This mission would require them to blend in with the local population, carry minimal weapons, and rely on stealth and deception rather than superior firepower. Sarah spent 2 days practicing her cover story and civilian behavior with cultural advisors on base. She learned to walk differently, to keep her eyes downcast in the traditional manner of young Afghan women, and to respond appropriately to questions that might be asked by suspicious villagers or Taliban fighters. The infiltration began before dawn on a Tuesday morning, with the 3-person team being inserted by helicopter several kilometers from their target area. They carried backpacks with civilian clothing and minimal equipment, dressed as traders traveling through the mountain region. As they approached the first village where they hoped to gather intelligence, Sarah felt a different kind of nervous tension than she experienced before combat operations. In a firefight, she could rely on her training and equipment to keep her safe. This mission required her to be an actress, and any mistake in her performance could expose the entire team. The village was small, maybe 50 families living in traditional mud brick houses clustered around a central well. Children played in the dusty streets while women tended to household chores, and men gathered in small groups discussing local affairs. To any observer, Sarah and her teammates would look like just another group of travelers seeking water and supplies. Chief Rodriguez played his role perfectly, acting as a merchant interested in trading goods with the villagers. Morrison posed as Rodriguez's brother, while Sarah remained quiet and deferential in her role as Rodriguez's teenage daughter. Her language skills proved invaluable when the team needed to understand conversations between villagers that might contain useful intelligence. After spending most of the day in the village, Sarah overheard a conversation between 2 local men that made her heart race. They were discussing someone they called the teacher, who lived in the mountain caves and paid well for information about coalition forces. The description matched what they knew about the engineer, and more importantly, one of the men mentioned that the teacher was expecting a delivery of special materials within the next 2 days. That evening, as the team prepared to move to an observation position in the mountains, Sarah briefed Morrison and Rodriguez on what she had learned. "Sir, I think we found him. The villagers are talking about someone in the caves who matches the engineer's profile, and it sounds like he's expecting a shipment soon. That could be our opportunity to confirm his identity and call in support." Morrison studied the topographical map of the cave system. "If he's really up there, we need to get eyes on him before we commit additional resources. But those caves are a maze, and we don't know how many fighters he has with him." Sarah had been thinking about this problem during the long day of intelligence gathering. "Sir, what if we don't go into the caves? What if we position ourselves to observe the delivery and confirm his identity when he comes out to receive it?" Rodriguez looked up from checking his equipment. "That could work, but we need to find a position with good visibility and covered escape routes. And we'd be on our own up there for at least 48 hours." The next morning, the team began their climb into the mountains, moving slowly and carefully to avoid detection by any early warning systems the engineer might have in place. Sarah's rock climbing experience proved invaluable as they navigated the steep terrain, and her small size allowed her to scout ahead through narrow passages that would have been difficult for her larger teammates. They established their observation position on a ridge overlooking the main cave entrance, carefully concealed among the rocks and scrub vegetation. From their position, they could see the entire approach to the cave system and had multiple escape routes if they were discovered. The wait began. For 36 hours, the team maintained their surveillance, taking turns sleeping and observing while remaining constantly alert for signs of activity. Sarah found the waiting to be almost harder than direct combat. In a firefight, everything happened quickly, and you reacted on training and instinct. Surveillance required patience and mental discipline that was mentally exhausting. On the second afternoon of their observation, Sarah spotted movement near the cave entrance. Through her binoculars, she could see 3 men emerging from the caves, followed by a 4th man who immediately caught her attention. He was older than the others, maybe in his 50s, with graying hair and the soft appearance of someone who spent more time thinking than fighting. Most importantly, he matched the physical description they had been given of the engineer. "I think we have him," Sarah whispered to Morrison, passing him the binoculars. Morrison studied the figure for several minutes, comparing him to the photographs and descriptions in their intelligence files. "That's him. That's definitely the engineer." An hour later, a small convoy of vehicles arrived at the base of the mountain, carrying what appeared to be supplies and materials. Sarah watched as the engineer personally inspected several packages being unloaded from the vehicles, handling them with the care that suggested they contained explosive materials or components. Morrison made the decision to call in additional support for a capture operation. The engineer's presence was confirmed. They had detailed intelligence about the cave layout and approach routes, and the target was clearly engaged in bomb-making activities that posed an immediate threat to coalition forces and civilians. The assault team arrived before dawn the next morning, inserting by helicopter at the base of the mountain, while Sarah's surveillance team maintained their observation position to provide real-time intelligence about enemy movements. As the assault team began their approach to the caves, Sarah noticed something that made her stomach clench with worry. Through her binoculars, she could see movement in the rocks above the assault team's route. The engineer's fighters had positioned themselves in an ambush position that would devastate the approaching SEALs. "Falcon Base, this is Overwatch," Sarah called over the radio, using their designated call sign for the surveillance team. "You have enemy fighters in the rocks above your position, approximately 200 meters ahead of your current location. Count at least 6 fighters, probably more." The assault team leader's voice came back immediately. "Overwatch, can you provide accurate coordinates for engagement?" Sarah studied the enemy positions through her scope, calculating ranges and identifying the specific locations of each fighter. "I have 6 confirmed positions, transmitting coordinates now." What happened next would be talked about in SEAL circles for years to come. Sarah began engaging the enemy fighters from her concealed position nearly 800 meters away, using her sniper rifle to systematically eliminate the ambush before it could be sprung on the assault team. One by one, she neutralized the enemy fighters with precision shots that demonstrated not just exceptional marksmanship, but incredible tactical judgment in choosing targets and timing. "Tango down," Sarah called after each shot, her voice calm and professional despite the intensity of the situation. "Overwatch has eliminated the immediate threat. Assault team is clear to proceed." The assault team reached the cave entrance without encountering resistance, thanks to Sarah's intervention. The engineer was captured alive along with a treasure trove of intelligence materials that led to the disruption of dozens of other terrorist cells throughout the region. During the mission debrief, the assault team leader specifically requested to meet Sarah to thank her personally for saving their lives. "Ma'am," he said, "I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've never seen shooting like that. You saved my entire team with that precision fire. We owe you our lives." Morrison later recommended Sarah for the Silver Star, one of the military's highest decorations for valor in combat. In his recommendation letter, he wrote, Petty Officer Martinez demonstrated exceptional courage, tactical judgment, and marksmanship skills under combat conditions. Her actions directly saved the lives of 12 fellow service members and led to the successful capture of a high-value target responsible for numerous attacks on coalition forces. After 18 months in Afghanistan, Team 3 rotated back to the United States for a period of rest, refit, and training for their next deployment. Sarah had participated in over 70 combat operations, earned multiple commendations for valor, and proven beyond any doubt that women could serve effectively in the most elite military units. But the transition back to civilian life, even the military version of civilian life, was challenging. Sarah found herself constantly scanning for threats that didn't exist, startling at unexpected noises, and having difficulty sleeping without the familiar sounds of helicopters and generators that had become the soundtrack of her deployment. She also struggled with the celebrity status that came with being the first woman to serve in combat with the Navy SEALs. Reporters wanted interviews, military officials wanted her to speak at recruiting events, and everyone seemed to have an opinion about whether women should be serving in special operations roles. Sarah just wanted to be left alone to do her job. She had never sought the spotlight, and the constant attention made her uncomfortable. More importantly, she worried that the focus on her gender was overshadowing the contributions of her teammates and the serious nature of the work they were doing. During her post-deployment leave, Sarah returned to Iowa to visit her family. Cedar Falls looked exactly the same as always, but Sarah felt like she was seeing it through different eyes. The simple problems and concerns of small-town life seemed almost trivial compared to the life and death situation she had been dealing with for the past year and a half. Her parents could see the changes in her immediately. Sarah was quieter than she had been before deployment, more serious, and less likely to laugh at her father's jokes. She started at unexpected sounds and seemed to be constantly aware of her surroundings in a way that suggested she was still mentally prepared for combat. Elena Martinez worried about her daughter, recognizing the signs of combat stress that she had seen in Miguel when he returned from Vietnam. She tried to create a peaceful, supportive environment for Sarah's visit, but she could see that her daughter was struggling to readjust to normal life. One evening, as they sat together on the front porch watching the sunset over the cornfields, Elena asked Sarah the question she had been afraid to voice. "Mija, are you okay? Really okay?" Sarah was quiet for a long time, considering how to answer. She thought about the mission she had been on, the people she had killed, the friends she had lost to IEDs and sniper fire. She thought about the nightmares that woke her up most nights and the way her heart raced whenever she heard a helicopter overhead. "I don't know, Mom," she finally answered honestly. "I did important work over there. I saved lives and stopped bad people from hurting innocent civilians. But it changed me in ways I'm still trying to understand." Elena reached over and took her daughter's hand. "Your father went through the same thing when he came back from Vietnam. It took him years to find his balance again. But you know what helped him the most?" "What?" "Remembering why he had served in the first place. Not for the government or the military or even for his country. Really, he served to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Once he found ways to do that in civilian life, he started to heal." Sarah nodded, thinking about her mother's words. She had always known that her purpose was to stand between innocent people and those who would harm them. Maybe the challenge now was finding ways to fulfill that purpose outside of the military context she had become accustomed to. 2 weeks later, Sarah returned to Coronado to begin preparing for her team's next deployment. But she carried her mother's words with her and began to think seriously about what she wanted to do with the skills and experience she had gained as a Navy SEAL. She had no way of knowing that in just a few months, those skills would be put to the test in a way she had never expected. In a small coffee shop in San Diego, 3 strangers would make the mistake of assuming that a quiet woman sitting alone was an easy target. They would learn the hard way that some people you just don't mess with. After 3 combat deployments and 6 years of active duty with the SEALs, Sarah Martinez made the difficult decision to transition out of the military. She had accomplished everything she had set out to do, and more, proving that women could serve effectively in the most elite military units. But the constant deployments, the physical toll of special operations, and her desire to find new ways to serve her community led her to pursue civilian opportunities. Sarah moved to San Diego, where she took a job with a private security consulting firm that specialized in training corporate executives and government officials in personal protection and crisis management. The work was interesting and allowed her to use her military skills in a civilian context, but it felt hollow compared to the life and death mission she had been conducting overseas. She rented a small apartment in the Hillcrest neighborhood, not far from Balboa Park, and tried to establish a normal civilian routine. She discovered that adjusting to regular life was more challenging than she had anticipated. Simple activities like grocery shopping or going to the movies felt strange after years of military structure and constant alertness. Sarah also struggled with the civilian job market's expectations and assumptions. Despite her exceptional military record and proven leadership abilities, some employers seemed uncomfortable with the idea of hiring a female combat veteran. Others wanted to use her story for publicity purposes rather than valuing her actual skills and experience. The nightmares were another challenge. Sarah would wake up several times a week in a cold sweat, reliving moments from combat operations or dreaming about teammates who hadn't made it home. She attended counseling sessions at the VA hospital, which helped somewhat, but the transition to civilian life remained difficult. After 8 months of struggling to find her place in the civilian world, Sarah decided to take some time off to figure out what she really wanted to do with the rest of her life. She had saved most of her military pay during deployments, so she could afford to take a break from working while she considered her options. It was during this period of reflection and uncertainty that Sarah found herself on a Tuesday morning in March, sitting alone in a small coffee shop called Brew and Bean in the Gaslamp Quarter of downtown San Diego. She had discovered the place a few weeks earlier and found it to be a peaceful spot where she could sit with her laptop, work on her resume, and people watch while trying to decide what career path to pursue. The coffee shop was typical of many in San Diego. Exposed brick walls decorated with local art, mismatched furniture that gave a cozy feel, and the kind of atmospheric lighting that made everything look warm and inviting. Sarah had claimed a small table in the back corner, positioned so that she could see both the front door and the back exit. Old habits from her military training died hard. She was dressed casually that morning in jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. To anyone observing her, she would have looked like just another woman in her late 20s, possibly a graduate student or young professional taking advantage of free Wi-Fi to get some work done. Nothing about her appearance suggested that she was one of the most highly trained warriors in the world. The morning had started peacefully. Sarah was reviewing job postings for security consulting positions while nursing her second cup of coffee and enjoying the quiet atmosphere. The coffee shop wasn't crowded, just a few other customers scattered around at various tables, mostly people working on laptops or reading books. That's when they walked in. The 3 men who entered Brew and Bean shortly after 10 a.m. were the kind of people who demanded attention wherever they went, though not for positive reasons. The leader appeared to be in his early 30s, tall and muscular with a kind of aggressive swagger that suggested he was used to intimidating people. His name was Derek Nash, and he was a former college football player whose athletic career had ended due to steroid abuse and academic issues. Nash's 2 companions were cut from similar cloth. Tony Ricci was a gym enthusiast who worked sporadically in construction and spent most of his time trying to pick up women at bars and beaches. Marcus Webb was the youngest of the 3 at 25, a trust fund kid whose wealthy parents had bailed him out of trouble more times than anyone could count. All 3 men had been drinking heavily the night before at a bachelor party in the Gaslamp Quarter, and they were still partially intoxicated as they stumbled into the coffee shop looking for something to help with their hangovers. They were loud, obnoxious, and clearly operating under the assumption that their size and aggressive attitudes gave them license to behave however they wanted. Sarah noticed them immediately when they walked in, her military training automatically cataloging potential threats and assessing the situation. The men were obviously intoxicated, which made them unpredictable. They were also clearly looking for trouble, based on their body language and the way they were scanning the coffee shop for targets. She went back to her laptop, hoping they would order their drinks and leave without causing problems. But Derek Nash had other ideas. Nash had noticed Sarah sitting alone in the corner and decided she looked like an easy target for the kind of harassment that he and his friends found amusing when they were drunk. He saw a small woman by herself, probably a college student or office worker, who would be intimidated by their aggressive behavior. "Hey, sweetheart," Nash called out loudly, causing the other customers in the coffee shop to look up from their activities. "You look lonely over there. Why don't you come join us for a real drink?" Sarah glanced up from her laptop briefly, made eye contact with Nash for just a second, then returned to her work without responding. It was the same look she had given bullies her entire life. Calm, assessing, and completely unintimidated. Nash interpreted her silence as fear or snobbery, either of which annoyed him. He was used to getting reactions from women when he approached them, whether positive or negative. Being ignored was not something his ego could tolerate. "I'm talking to you," he said, his voice getting louder and more aggressive. He started walking toward Sarah's table, with Ricci and Webb following behind him like loyal pack animals. Sarah closed her laptop slowly and looked up at Nash as he approached. Her expression was completely calm, showing neither fear nor anger. To Nash, this looked like weakness. He had no idea that he was looking at someone who had faced down terrorists in mountain caves and eliminated enemy fighters from distances of nearly a kilometer. "I heard you," Sarah said quietly. "I'm not interested." Nash laughed, a harsh sound that was meant to intimidate. "Not interested? Do you know who I am? Do you know what I could do for a little nobody like you?" The other customers in the coffee shop were beginning to look uncomfortable. The barista behind the counter, a college student named Amy, was reaching for her phone to call the police. But everything was happening quickly, and Nash was already standing directly over Sarah's table, using his height and size to try to intimidate her. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," Nash demanded, leaning down towards Sarah's face. That's when Sarah made eye contact with him fully for the first time. Nash later said that looking into her eyes was like staring into the face of a predator that was deciding whether or not to attack. There was no fear there, no submission, no uncertainty. Just a cold, calculating assessment that made him feel like prey for the first time in his adult life. "You need to back away from me," Sarah said, her voice still quiet, but carrying an undertone of authority that made several other customers in the coffee shop turn to look. Nash felt a moment of uncertainty, something in Sarah's tone and expression triggering an instinctive warning. But his pride and the alcohol in his system overrode his survival instincts. Instead of backing down, he decided to escalate the situation. "Or what?" he sneered, reaching out to grab Sarah's shoulder. What happened next took less than 3 seconds, but would be replayed in security camera footage and witness statements dozens of times over the following weeks. As Nash's hand reached toward her shoulder, Sarah moved with the fluid precision of someone who had been trained to react to threats without conscious thought. She caught his wrist with her left hand, stood up from her chair in one smooth motion, and twisted his arm in a way that immediately put him in excruciating pain and complete loss of control. Nash found himself bent over at an unnatural angle, his face pressed against the table where Sarah had been sitting, his arm twisted behind his back in a position that would break bones if he tried to resist. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, causing him to cry out in shock and confusion. "I told you to back away," Sarah said calmly, maintaining the joint lock that held Nash completely immobilized. Ricci and Webb stared in disbelief for a moment, unable to process what they had just witnessed. Their leader, who was twice Sarah's size and had been a college athlete, was now completely helpless and crying out in pain. Ricci was the first to react, stepping forward with his fists raised. "Let him go, you crazy." He never finished a sentence. Sarah released Nash, who collapsed to the floor holding his injured arm, and turned her attention to Ricci. He threw a wild punch that she avoided easily, then found himself spun around with his arm twisted behind his back and his face pressed against the brick wall of the coffee shop. "Stay down," Sarah told Nash, who was still writhing on the floor. Then she looked at Webb, who was backing away with his hands raised. "I don't want any trouble," Webb said quickly, realizing that his friends had picked a fight they couldn't win. "Smart choice," Sarah replied, maintaining her grip on Ricci while watching Webb carefully. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 30 seconds, and Sarah was breathing normally while 2 of her 3 attackers were completely subdued. The other customers in the coffee shop sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Amy, the barista, had managed to call 911 during the confrontation, and police sirens could be heard approaching in the distance. Sarah released Ricci and stepped back, but remained in a position where she could respond quickly if any of the 3 men tried to attack again. Nash struggled to his feet, his arm hanging at an awkward angle, and his face red with pain and humiliation. He looked at Sarah with a mixture of rage and confusion, unable to understand how a woman half his size had dominated him so completely. "Who the hell are you?" he gasped. Sarah looked at him with the same calm expression she had maintained throughout the confrontation. "I'm someone you shouldn't have messed with." When the police arrived 3 minutes later, they found a scene that would have been comedy if it hadn't been so serious. 3 large men, all of whom appeared to have been in a fight, were sitting or standing in various states of distress while a small woman in casual clothing waited calmly to give her statement. Officer Patricia Gonzalez was the first responder, and she immediately recognized that something unusual had occurred. The 3 men all showed signs of being in a physical altercation, but the woman appeared to be completely unharmed and composed. "Ma'am," Officer Gonzalez said to Sarah, "are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" "I'm fine, officer," Sarah replied. "These 3 men approached me aggressively, and I defended myself when they became physical." Nash tried to interrupt, his voice high with indignation and pain. "She attacked us. We were just trying to talk to her, and she went crazy." Officer Gonzalez looked around the coffee shop, noting the positions of the tables and chairs, the lack of any damage except to the 3 men, and the fact that multiple witnesses were nodding in agreement with Sarah's version of events. Amy, the barista, stepped forward to give her account. "Officer, those 3 men came in here drunk and started harassing customers. They approached that woman's table even after she told them she wasn't interested, and one of them tried to grab her. She just defended herself." Several other customers corroborated Amy's account, describing how Nash had been loud and aggressive, had approached Sarah despite her clear disinterest, and had attempted to physically grab her before she responded. Officer Gonzalez turned her attention back to Sarah, studying her more carefully. There was something about the woman's composure and the way she carried herself that suggested she had training or experience beyond what was typical for civilian self-defense situations. "Ma'am, can I ask about your background? The way you handled this situation suggests you have some kind of training." Sarah nodded. "I'm a former Navy SEAL. I served multiple combat deployments before transitioning to civilian life recently." The officer's eyebrows rose slightly. She had heard about women being accepted into SEAL training, but had never met one personally. Looking at the scene in front of her, 3 large men subdued by 1 small woman without any weapons or apparent effort. Officer Gonzalez was beginning to understand what had really happened. Nash overheard Sarah's comment about being a Navy SEAL and felt his face turn red with embarrassment and anger. He had been beaten by a woman, which was humiliating enough, but learning that she was a trained special operations soldier made him feel even more foolish. "That's not possible," he said loudly. "Women can't be Navy SEALs." Sarah turned to look at him, her expression showing the faintest hint of amusement. "Actually, we can, and we are." Over the next hour, as police took statement from all the witnesses and reviewed the security camera footage, the full picture of what had occurred became clear. 3 intoxicated men had entered the coffee shop, approached a woman who was minding her own business, continued to harass her after she clearly indicated she wasn't interested, and then attempted to physically assault her when she refused to submit to their intimidation. The woman, who turned out to be a decorated combat veteran with multiple commendations for valor, had defended herself using minimal force necessary to neutralize the threat. She had not struck any of her attackers, had not used any weapons, and had not caused any permanent injury despite being fully capable of doing much worse. Derek Nash was arrested for assault and disorderly conduct. Tony Ricci was charged with assault and public intoxication. Marcus Webb, who had not actually made physical contact with Sarah, was cited for disorderly conduct and released. As the police finished their investigation and prepared to leave, Officer Gonzalez approached Sarah one more time. "Ms. Martinez," she said, "I want to thank you for handling this situation with such professionalism. A lot of people with your training might have responded much more aggressively to what those men did. You showed remarkable restraint." Sarah appreciated the officer's words, but she was already thinking about what had happened and what it meant. She had successfully defended herself without seriously injuring anyone, had protected other customers in the coffee shop from potential harassment, and had demonstrated that her military training could be applied effectively in civilian situations. More importantly, she had remembered her father's words about staying true to who she was. She had used her strength to protect rather than to destroy, had shown restraint even when dealing with people who deserved much harsher treatment, and had proven that her small size was no impediment to standing up for what was right. As Sarah packed up her laptop and prepared to leave the coffee shop, Amy approached her with a free cup of coffee and a grateful smile. "Thank you," the young barista said. "Those guys were making everyone in here really uncomfortable, and I was scared they might hurt someone. You probably saved all of us from a really bad situation." Sarah accepted the coffee and nodded her thanks, but she was already thinking about what came next. The incident had reminded her of something important. There were bullies everywhere, not just in foreign countries or military operations. There were people right here in her own community who needed someone to stand between them and those who would harm them. Maybe her mother had been right about finding new ways to serve that purpose in civilian life. Maybe there were opportunities to use her skills and experience to protect people who couldn't protect themselves, just as she had been doing since that day on the playground when she was 12 years old. That afternoon, Sarah researched organizations that worked with victims of domestic violence, taught self-defense classes to vulnerable populations, and provided security consulting for businesses and individuals who needed protection. She started making phone calls, setting up meetings, and exploring ways to turn her military experience into meaningful civilian service. 6 months later, Sarah had established her own personal protection and self-defense training company, specializing in teaching women and other vulnerable populations how to defend themselves. She also worked part-time with a nonprofit organization that provided security services for domestic violence shelters and safe houses. The incident at the coffee shop had been covered in local media, and Sarah's story had inspired other women veterans to reach out to her about similar career transitions. She began mentoring female veterans who were struggling to find their place in civilian life, helping them understand that their military skills and experience were valuable in many different contexts. Sarah never forgot the lesson she learned that morning in Bruin Bean. Sometimes the most important battles aren't fought on foreign battlefields against terrorist organizations. Sometimes they're fought in coffee shops against bullies who think they can intimidate innocent people. Either way, Sarah Martinez was ready. She had always been the girl who stood between the innocent and those who would harm them. The uniform might have changed, but her mission remained the same. And Derek Nash, Tony Ricci, and Marcus Webb had learned the hard way that some people you just don't mess with.